In this video, we're going to review how to conjugate verbs in the present tense and also in the Passé Composé. So we're going to start by reviewing how to conjugate regular verbs. So a regular verb is something that follows a regular pattern. The key to conjugating verbs is to follow the pattern. So we have three different groups of verbs. We have ER verbs, IR verbs, and RE verbs. And depending on which type of verb you're conjugating, you're going to use different endings. So these are endings that you just need to memorize based on which type of verb you're using. So these are the endings to memorize: E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT. Those are the endings for ER verbs. And for IR verbs, the endings are IS, IS, IT, ISS, ONS, ISS, EZ, and ISS, ENT. And the endings for RE verbs are S, S, nothing, ONS, EZ, ENT. So that's the first thing that is absolutely important to know when you're conjugating regular verbs in the present tense. So we're going to use that to help us in just a minute when we actually conjugate a verb. So there are two steps to conjugating a regular verb. Step 1 is to find the stem. And to find the stem, you're going to remove either the ER, the IR, or the RE from the end of the infinitive. So it just depends what kind of verb you have. So for example, if you have an ER verb like chanter, then to find the stem, you're going to take off the ER. If you have an IR verb like finir, then to find the stem, you're going to remove the IR. And if you have an RE verb like vendre, you're going to remove the RE. So what you're left with is the stem. So it's everything in the infinitive except the ER, the IR, or the RE. Step 2 is to add the endings. So these are the endings that you'll use for the different types of verbs. Okay, so these endings are over here. So now let's do an actual verb conjugation to practice what this would look like. We're going to conjugate the verb chanter. So what's step 1? Find the stem. So our stem is CHANT. And that's just this right here, CHANT. So that stem is going to go down in our verb table 6 times. So we're going to have CHANT all 6 times. Then we're going to add our endings. So we need to decide, is this an ER verb, an IR verb, or an RE verb? So ER, IR, or RE. Well, how do you know which kind it is? You look at the last 2 letters of it. So the last 2 letters of the verb tell you what kind of verb it is. So this one's an ER verb. So these are going to be our ER endings. So we have E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT. On the next slide, we'll try another one. All right, now we're going to try conjugating the verb choisir, to choose. So our first step is to find the stem. How do we find the stem? Well, you remove either the ER, IR, or RE from the end. In this case, it's an IR. So we remove the IR to find the stem. So our stem is CHOIS. Okay, so we're going to write that down 6 times. And now step 2 is to add the endings. What are the endings for IR verbs? Look over here. IS, IT, ISS, ONS, ISS, EZ, ISS, ENT. So these are going to get tacked on to the end of these. So IS, IT, ISS, ONS, ISS, EZ, ISS, ENT. Okay, just conjugated a verb. Now let's do an RE verb. Okay, now we're going to try conjugating the verb vendre, to sell. So step 1 is find the stem. To find the stem, you remove either the ER, IR, or RE. In this case, it's RE. So we remove the RE. So the stem that we're left with is VEND. So that's our stem. We're going to write that down 6 times. Now step 2 is add the endings. What kind of verb is this? Is it an ER, IR, or RE verb? Oh, it's an RE verb, so these are going to be our endings. SS, nothing. ONS, EZ, ENT. And that's how you conjugate regular verbs in the present tense. Now there are a couple things I want to go over before we move on to the next thing. Now, in order to use these verbs in a sentence, you have to actually know what the subject pronouns are that correspond to each of these spaces in the verb conjugation table. So, in order to use these in sentences, you have to know your subject pronouns. And they are je, tu, il, elle, on, and these kind of always go together. And then nous, vous, and il, elle. And those always go together. When I say they go together, I mean that the verb that goes with them is always conjugated the same way. So, when you're using these in a sentence, whichever ending is up here in the top right or top left corner is going to go with je. Whichever one's in the bottom right corner is going to go with il, elle. So, we have E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, and ENT. That's for ER verb endings. For IR verbs, we have IS, IT, ISSONS, ISSEZ, and ISSENT. And then for RE verb endings, we have SS nothing, ONS, EZ, ENT. S, S nothing, ONS, EZ, ENT. So I know this is a lot of endings to memorize, but if you memorize them in the groups like this, I think it's not as difficult. Okay, so the blue ones are the endings for ER verbs, the orange ones are the endings for IR verbs, and the green ones are the endings for RE verbs. So now let's put these into a sentence. So remember, when you're writing a sentence, every sentence needs to have a subject. So you need to have these subject pronouns memorized. So I'm just going to put them up here as reference. And you need to know that they go in this order. So this spot on the table corresponds to this spot on the verb ending chart. Okay, so how would you say the sentence? Well, actually, let's not even translate it into English. I'm just going to give you a subject. So let's do je, and then you're going to conjugate the verb vendre. So you want to say, I sell. Okay, well, what kind of verb is this? It's an RE verb. So our first step is take off the RE to find the stem. So there's my stem. And now step 2 is add the ending. My ending for RE verbs is S. Okay, so we conjugated that verb. Let's try another one. How about vous? Danser. So you want to say you dance, and you're going to use the verb danser. So to find the stem, we're going to take off the ER. We're left with DANS. That's our stem. Now we need to add our endings. What kind of verb is danser? ER, IR, or RE? It's an ER verb. So we look at our ER chart, the ending that goes with vous. So we look over here. Vous is on the right side of the table in the middle. So we go to the right side of the table in the middle. EZ is our ending. Okay, so it's just following that pattern. Ideally, you would understand what these mean, but this is what you use in sentences. So if you know that danser means to dance and vous means you, then when you put them together in a sentence, they mean you dance, or you are dancing, or you do dance. Okay, this is the present tense. Now, if you're trying to write a sentence, like you're trying to say what you do on, let's say you want to say, here's what I do on Christmas. Every Christmas, I open presents. Actually, open is not a good example because that's an irregular verb. So let's say on Christmas, I eat with my family. Okay, so you need the word I. So you want to say, I eat. So you'd say, on Christmas, I eat with my family. Okay, so there'd be stuff before it and stuff after it, but right now all we care about is the subject and the verb. Okay, so how do you say I? It's going to be one of these, and I is a pretty simple one. Most people remember that one. It's je. Okay, and then after that goes your verb. What's the verb for eat? So we really want to say to eat. Well, we don't want to say that, but we're going to start with that. Even in English, we started with to eat, and then to conjugate it, we took off the to. To eat in French is manger. So now we need to conjugate it so that it matches je. So to conjugate, you take off the er. That's your stem. And then the ending is from the ending chart over here. So je mange. And actually, if we were using this in a sentence, truly saying, on Christmas I eat, then this would be a lowercase j, because it would be the middle of a sentence. But at this point, we're not really concerned about that. We're just trying to get the right form of the verb. Okay, so what we just did was we practiced conjugating regular verbs in the present tense. So I'm keeping that over on the side of my board to remind you that regular verbs still exist and they're always going to be conjugated this way. Well, there are some exceptions, but most of the time regular verbs are conjugated like this. Then we have irregular verbs. So irregular verbs are verbs that don't follow this pattern. They don't do this. There's no stem and there are no endings. There's just a verb that you have to memorize. And you've already learned a few of them. One of them is avoir. One of them is être. And one of them is aller. And one of them is faire. And there are, of course, a whole bunch more. But right now we're just going to look at these ones. So, what do these look like? Well, like I said, there's no stem and no ending. So these ones you just have to memorize the way they are. Avoir is a, avons, avait, on. Être is suis, est, some, et, sont. Aller is v, va, allons, aller, vont. And faire is fait, fait, faisons, faites, font. And I don't have a special way to memorize those. You just have to memorize them. In most cases, for class, you can look them up on a reference sheet. But if I didn't want you to use materials to reference things, you would just have to memorize those, just like you would have to memorize these endings. Okay, there's not like a pattern that we use to figure these out. This is just what the French language gods say are these verbs. So you just have to learn them the way they are. By the way, there aren't really any French language gods, but there is something called l'Académie Française, which is in charge of the whole French language. So, sort of. Okay, so what are these verbs actually saying? Let's use some in a sentence. I'm going to get rid of these two on the bottom, and we're just going to use these ones up top just for practice. Okay, so these two verbs you see here, avoir and être, are two of the most important verbs that you're going to need to know when you're learning French. They mean to have and to be. So what if I wanted to say, I have a pen? Well, I need the subject I, which is je. Then I need the verb have. Well, you would need to know which one of these means have, but this one means have. So my subject, my verb that goes with je is a. But this one's a little different because it starts with a vowel. So when it starts with a vowel, we're going to do J apostrophe AI. So this is I have. And then the rest of the sentence would just be un stilo. That's just a noun. So you could look that up in a dictionary or something. But this part, this is the verb. It comes from up here. Okay. What if I wanted to change this to she has a pen? Well, we would say elle, because that means she. And then you'd have to go over here and find the conjugation that matches with elle, which is a. Elle a un stylo. Okay, so irregular verbs, there's no stem and there's no ending. There's just the verb the way it is. Okay, so that's why I just pulled these directly from here. These are not endings. These are endings for regular verbs. These are just the verb itself. Okay. Now we're going to try conjugating some other verbs that are some other irregular verbs that are pretty common. We have mettre, which means to put or to put on, and prendre, which means to take, and we have boire, which means to drink, and devoir, which means to have to do something. It's like to need to do something. And again, just like the other ones, these are irregular, so there's no stem and there's no ending. You just have to memorize them. So we have mais, mettons, mettez, met. Oops, this is an N. Prendre. We have prend. I'm going to run out of space. Prend. Prend. Prenons. Prenez. Going to run out of space. It's P-R-E-N-N-E-N-T. Boire. We have bois, 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 bouvons, buvez, boive, and devoir, which is doit, 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 devons, devez, doivent. Okay, now I wouldn't expect that you'd be able to go that fast when you're conjugating these. It would be really cool if you could, but it takes a lot of practice and using them to get these memorized. These are not as common as avoir and être and aller, so these probably will take a little bit more practice. But if you can use a reference sheet, like if you can go back and look at your list of irregular verbs or go back and look at your notes, this should match what's in your notes. Also, you might be wondering where I came up with these. Like, what am I looking at to find these verbs? Well, actually nothing, because I have them memorized, but even if that weren't the case, there really is no rule. Like, there's no, Like over here, we have find the stem and then add the ending. There's no rule like that. It's just, this is the verb. So yeah, essentially these just need to be memorized. For our purposes right now, you can just use your notes, but you want to know all the conjugations of these. And this is how you conjugate verbs in the present tense. So most verbs are going to be regular verbs that do what these are over here. But then you have a handful of irregular verbs. So we've got these 4, and then there were 4 on the previous screen that I conjugated, and then there's a bunch more. But when you look at all the verbs in the whole language, most verbs are regular verbs. Okay, and that's really all there is to conjugating verbs in the present tense. Now we're going to try the past tense. Now we're going to try conjugating some verbs in the Passé Composé. So the Passé Composé is a different tense from the regular tense. All the stuff that we did over here, this was all the present tense. Okay, so these are present tense irregular verb endings, and then here's just one irregular verb in the past, or in the, did I say past? I meant present. These are present tense verb endings, and this is the present tense of an irregular verb, avoir. But there are a ton more of these for different verbs. Okay, for the Passé Composé, we're going to follow a pattern now. And like I've told you before, the key to conjugating verbs is following. The key to following verbs is following patterns. The key to conjugating verbs is following patterns. So to form the Passé Composé, we're going to have a subject, and then an auxiliary verb, and then a past participle. And I'm just abbreviating those because it's easier. So your subject can be any of these. Je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. Okay? Your auxiliary verb is going to be the verb avoir most of the time. So right now we're just going to worry about the ones that are avoir. There are some exceptions, but most verbs use avoir. So avoir is the auxiliary, and so you would need to be able to conjugate avoir. So this is going to come from up here. So it's going to be a, avons, avez, on. So if our subject is je, then our auxiliary is going to be a. If our subject is tu, our auxiliary is going to be a. If our subject is il, elle, or on, our auxiliary is going to be a. If our subject is nous, auxiliary will be avons, vous, avez, and il, elle, on. And then for the past participle, you have to memorize, or whatever you prefer to call it. You have to learn these endings. Just trying to get some different colors here. So with the past participles, you're going to look at what the infinitive is. So remember how over here we talked about regular verbs, er, ir, and re? Well, you're going to need that infinitive to make the past participle. So let's say your infinitive ends with er. Then the er is going to become e with the accent aigu over it. If the infinitive ends with ir, then the ir is going to be replaced with the letter I. And if the infinitive ends with re, then the re is going to be replaced with the letter u. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite these as, actually just these, as a little note up at the top of my page so I can use that pattern as reference. Okay, so now we're going to take a verb and conjugate it in the Passé Composé with the subject that I give you. So we're going to start with the subject nous. And you need to have two things after it. Remember that there are three parts to the Passé Composé. The first is the subject, the second is the auxiliary, and the third is the past participle. So the subject is given to you. It's just from this chart up here, nous. The auxiliary verb comes from here. It's going to be the form of avoir that goes with nous. So nous is in the top right corner of the table up here. So we're going to use the one that's in the top right corner of this table. So it's avons. So nous avons. And then let's conjugate the verb chanter. Okay, so we're putting the verb chanter in the Passé Composé. So to find the past participle of chanter, we're going to take off the ER. So, and then that ER is going to be replaced with E. E with the accent aigu over it. So what this means is we, here, this might be kind of confusing when you still have this here. And then this part together means sang. And what it really means is we have sung. But in French you can say we have sung or we have sang, and it means the same thing. Now, what would happen if I changed my subject? Okay, I'm going to change my subject to tu. Then the only thing that changes is the auxiliary verb. So now we're going to use a, because that's over here. That's the tu form. Tu is right here, and a goes with it. But the past participle stays the same. So the past participle does not depend on the subject. Only the first part of the Passé Composé matches the subject. So one way that I've heard this is two verbs in a row don't go, meaning you can't conjugate two verbs in a row. So, I mean, technically this whole thing is conjugated, but this is the verb that's conjugated, and then this is just in the this is just the past participle. So the past participle does not match the subject. The auxiliary matches the subject, and that's what means that it's being conjugated. So this means you have sung, or it could also be you sang. So let's try a different verb. Now I'm going to make it a little bit harder. I'm going to give you the subject elle, and I'm just going to say, okay, put this in the Passé Composé. Okay, now I only drew one line, but I want you to write the sentence, she chose. And then if you want, you can finish the sentence. But it doesn't matter right now to me. So she chose, or actually, oops, I made a mistake. It's not she chose, it's they chose. They chose, or they have chosen. Okay, so now you're going to take the verb choisir and put it in the Passé Composé. To do that, you need a subject, which is already here, and then you need an auxiliary verb, which is one of these. So which of these goes with elle? Look over here. Elle is in the bottom right corner. On is in the bottom right corner. Okay, and then for our past participle, the verb is choisir To form the past participle, we replace the IR with I. So you can think of it as removing the IR, and then instead of IR, you use I. So, elles ont choisi. They chose. Now, if I changed my subject to singular she, then only this part changes. The past participle stays the same. Okay, now we're going to look at the verb parler, and we're going to conjugate it in two tenses. So on the left side, we're going to conjugate it in the present tense, and on the right side, we're going to conjugate it in the passé composé. So I'm not even really sure if this will fit on the board right here, but we're going to try. Actually, it probably would make more sense if I did one up here and one down here, but that's okay. Okay, so let's do the present tense. So with the present tense, the steps are over here. First step is find the stem, then add the ending. So the stem is, take off the ER, so we've got P-A-R-L. So P-A-R-L, 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 P-A-R-L. And then step 2 is add the ending. Well, since parler is an ER verb, we're going to use the ER endings. So E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT. Great. Now let's do it in the passé composé. So with the passé composé, remember there are three parts: the subject, the auxiliary, and the past participle. We're not going to do the subject right now. So the past participle is going to be the form of avoir. So we're going to have a, I'm going to leave some space, a, avons, avait, on. And then the past participle. Let's see if I can fit all this on here. P-A-R-L, accent aigu. Okay, I'm going to go through and I'm going to just put P-A-R-L down for all of these. This isn't really the stem. Like, it's not necessarily the same stem we used over here, even though it does look the same. I guess it probably is considered the stem. But for all of these, it's going to be accent aigu because the past participle doesn't change. Okay, so in the passé composé, you can see there are two words. That's why it's called the compound past, because there are two parts of the verb. Now, let's say we wanted to change the verb to something else. Then in the passé composé, the pink part would stay the same because that's the auxiliary, that's the form of avoir. But the past participle would change. So let's do another one. Let's do an RE. Okay, now we're going to do the verb fondre. And this time I decided to put them on the top and bottom instead of the left and right. So for the present tense, we're going to follow these steps. Step 1, find the stem. Step 2, add the ending. So our stem is going to be F-O-N-D. And then our ending, since fondre is an RE verb, we're going to use these endings down here. So we have S, S, nothing, ONS, EZ, ENT. Now for the passé composé. We're going to start with the auxiliary, avoir, et, a, avons, avait, on. And then for the past participle, I've got too many markers in my hand. Okay, so for our past participle, we're going to get rid of this RE again and change it to, up here it says the RE becomes U. So I'm going to just copy down just so I don't have to keep switching back and forth with my marker. And then that RE becomes U. Okay, and again, this U, this isn't really a verb ending. Like, it's not one of these. The U is the same for all of them because it's the past participle. The part that changes for each of the subjects is the auxiliary. Okay, back to just the Passé Composé. To form the Passé Composé, you need to be able to form the past participle. So let's practice making some past participles. I'm going to write the verb, and you write the past participle. Okay, if you need to pause the video to do that, go ahead and pause it. And now here are the answers. So remember, to find the past participle, you're going to replace these last letters. So before I even do the answers, I'm just going to cross out these letters. It's the last two letters. So this is the first part. Okay, so I'm not finished yet, but those are all the verbs without the ER, the RE, or the IR. So really those are the stems. And then the ones that ended with ER are going to get an E accent aigu. So we have parler and danser. The ones that ended with IR are going to get an I. So fini and choisi. And the ones that ended with RE are going to get a U. Okay, so like I keep saying, conjugating verbs is following patterns. Now there is one more thing that I want to show you, but we haven't done this yet in class. At the time when I'm making this video, we haven't covered this yet in class, but we will really soon. So if you're watching this before we've gotten to irregular past participles, and this already was overwhelming for you, then you can stop watching right now. But if you would like to review irregular past participles, keep watching. So some verbs have irregular past participles. And there's really no trick to finding them. You just have to learn them. So typically it's irregular verbs that have irregular past participles. So I'm just going to write a bunch of irregular verbs on my whiteboard, and then I'll show you what their past participles are. So mettre, prendre, être, avoir, faire, vouloir, pouvoir, boire, suivre, and voir. And this is just 10 of them because that's all I could fit on this page. But there are a whole bunch more than what you see here. So these are the irregular past participles for these. Me, pris, été, eu, fait, voulu, pu, bu, suivi, and vu. And those are something that you would have to memorize. At the time where I'm making this video, you don't have to memorize them quite yet, but we are going to start learning them very soon. And you'll get more added to your plate. So let's try writing a sentence with one of them. So I'll just keep those top two there so we can reference them, and we'll just use those in our example. So what if I wanted to write the sentence, I wanted a soda. So the soda, that's just like extra stuff. Okay, so that would just be un coca if you wanted a Coke. Okay, but the I wanted, this is the passé composé. So the subject I is je. Our auxiliary is going to be the verb avoir, et. And then the past participle, normally one of these is the past participle, but for the verb want, we use voulu. Okay, what if I wanted to say, she put on a dress. She put on, and remember, mettre can be put on or put, so it can be put on clothing. A dress. So the a dress, that's just like fun stuff. The robe. And then she put on, so past tense. She is elle. And then we need an auxiliary. This comes from up here. And then put on. The past tense of mettre is me. So she put on a dress. Okay, so again, following patterns. And now we're starting to add a lot of patterns to our French lives. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, please let me know.